You know what's scariest? Not when your ex comes back to apologize, but when you realize he didn't just do it to you. Everything for the past 9 months, the times he accidentally showed up, disappeared, and came back, turned out to be a repeating pattern. And the scariest part? My best friend knew all along, but didn't dare say anything. I never thought of myself as someone who could get pulled into a relationship I couldn't control. At 27, living alone in a small apartment near the city center, working at a design studio, meeting my best friend, Nora, on weekends or spending quiet evenings reading, my life was stable to the point of being a little boring. But I liked that kind of boring. Maybe that was why, when Tyler showed up, I didn't realize how that stability was slowly shifting, little by little, in ways so subtle I couldn't recognize them until much later. I met Tyler on a light rainy afternoon. I was waiting for a coffee to go when he stood behind me and asked a very ordinary question, "Long day?" I turned around and saw his eyes, bright, focused, but somehow too attentive. Yet I still answered, as if he'd managed to pull the words right out of me. When we walked out of the cafe, he asked for my number just to ask more about the book you mentioned. The way he said it felt so natural that I didn't feel the need to be cautious. A few weeks later, I found myself getting used to Tyler texting me every morning, telling me little stories from his day, sending photos of meals he cooked. Not pushy, not demanding. Very gentle. But sometimes, he somehow knew where I was even though I didn't remember telling him. Or he would mention Nora in a strange tone, even though I had only brought her up briefly. I brushed everything off because the signs were too small to analyze clearly. We officially started dating after a late evening walk around the lake. Tyler talked about his family, about a few unpleasant past relationships. I talked about my boundaries, how I hated being monitored or controlled, hated the feeling of someone needing to know what I was doing 24/7. Tyler smiled and said he understood perfectly. And at that moment, I naively believed him. The following months were peaceful. I liked having someone to text in the morning. Tyler knew how to appear at the right moments. When I was tired, he softened. When I was energetic, he matched my pace. I thought he was intuitive. Only later did I realize it wasn't intuition, it was observation. The first clear warning sign showed up after 4 months. I had dinner with coworkers and came home a bit late. I texted Tyler while walking back. He saw the message but didn't reply. But the moment I stepped into my apartment hallway, my phone rang. Tyler's voice wasn't loud, but it was tight. "Why didn't you respond to me for an hour?" I said I had texted him. He apologized so quickly, it made me feel like I was the one being overly sensitive. Then came more of those small questions. Where are you? With who? When are you coming home? Not frequent enough to accuse him of being controlling, but steady enough to cast a shadow behind me. I still answered, not wanting to escalate things. But inside, layer by layer, I started feeling uncomfortable. What confused me most were the times I told small harmless lies to avoid unnecessary conflict, like saying I was home when I was actually out with Nora, yet Tyler always guessed my location correctly. I once joked that he had a sixth sense. Tyler only smiled, but that smile made something cold run down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. Everything cracked after a small argument over a male coworker's message. I said I needed a few days to calm down. Tyler didn't argue. He just smiled lightly and said, "Whatever you want." But that smile didn't resemble a person who was sad or upset. It looked more like he had just heard something he could use later. Then he disappeared. 2 whole weeks. Not a single explanation. I went from angry, to worried, to wondering if I had overreacted. When I told Nora, she stayed silent for a very long time before saying, "Something's not right." The way she said it made my chest tighten, like she knew something I didn't. But at that time, I thought she was just trying to help me stay grounded. I had no idea that Tyler's disappearance was only the smallest part of a much longer story I was about to walk straight into. And I had no idea that Nora, the person I trusted most, had seen the signs long before I did, but she never said a word. Tyler came back at the exact moment when I had nearly accepted that everything between us was over. After 2 full weeks of silence, no replies, no calls, Not even a vague excuse, my emotions had already cycled through anger, disappointment, resignation, and finally, a strange emptiness. I no longer expected him to come back. But life has a way of throwing things at you precisely when you're least prepared. That evening, I was at a small gathering with mutual friends. The atmosphere was light, music low, people chatting in quiet groups. I was pouring myself a drink when the door opened, and Tyler walked in as if his disappearance and his return had nothing to do with each other. The first emotion that rose in me was not relief, it was a jolt, a sudden stiffness inside my chest, as if my body sensed something before my mind could process it. His eyes scanned the room and softened, too smoothly, when they landed on me. He approached, apologized for family issues, and offered a perfectly curated explanation. The apology was too clean, too practiced, too well-timed. It didn't feel real, but it was just gentle enough to make me doubt my own anger. Tyler stayed close the entire evening, like a carefully placed shadow. He didn't cling, but he stayed just within reach, a hand on the back of my chair, a quiet question, a soft comment. Not intrusive, yet never far. And every time I glanced away, I'd catch him watching me, not affectionately, but attentively, tracking. When Nora offered to drive me home, I accepted instantly. I wanted space. But Tyler stepped forward with that same polite smile and said, "Let me take you home. Just to make sure you're safe." I declined. He paused, only for a second, then smiled again, though his eyes didn't change at all. That single second told me more than any argument could. In the following days, his messages increased. Not loving messages, but questions. What did I eat? Where was I sitting at work? Who was nearby? When would I get home? Innocent questions on the surface, yet the pattern was unmistakable. He wasn't reconnecting, he was monitoring. One night, when I arrived home, Tyler was standing outside my building. He hadn't texted. Hadn't called. Had no reason to be there. "I just need 10 minutes, he said. I said I was tired. He followed anyway, keeping a socially acceptable distance that made it impossible for outsiders to see anything wrong. But when the elevator doors closed, the air thickened instantly. "Don't make me guess what's going on with us," he said quietly. The softness of his voice only made the threat underneath more obvious. After that, Tyler began showing up coincidentally everywhere, at the grocery store, near my office, on streets he had no reason to be on. Each time I confronted him with surprise, he smiled. "What? Coincidence." But coincidences don't repeat themselves that precisely. I told Nora. For the first time, her face changed, not with shock, but with recognition. She hesitated before asking, "Are you sure he hasn't done this to someone else?" The question sliced through me. Why ask that, unless she suspected something? From that moment on, every movement Tyler made, every sudden appearance, every lingering look became heavier. Pressure wasn't something subtle anymore, it was tightening, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. I began distancing myself intentionally. Shorter replies. Longer delays. No more initiating conversations. I thought if I pulled back, Tyler would understand things were going too far and give me space. But instead of loosening, something in him tightened, like an invisible cord he'd thrown around me was suddenly being pulled with precision. One Friday evening, exhausted from work, I walked into the company parking lot. The air still smelled of rain. Dim yellow lights reflected off the pavement, making everything look hazy, dreamlike, except the sense of being watched, which was painfully clear. When I reached my car, Tyler was there, leaning casually against the trunk as if he belonged in that space. Not angry, not frantic. Just waiting. "We need to talk," he said softly. I told him no. He stepped closer, blocking the car door, not aggressively, but intentionally. His hand rested on the handle before mine could reach it. "If you don't move, I'll call the police." The words left my mouth before I could think. Tyler smiled, a thin, unsettling smile. "You won't." I lifted my phone. Instantly, his expression shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. You're pushing me into a corner, he murmured. I didn't answer. I walked toward the exit, heart pounding hard enough to make my vision pulse. Tyler followed, steady, quiet, matching my steps. Not chasing. Not calling out. Just following. Then a woman's voice cut through the tension. Are you okay? A woman by her SUV stared sharply between us. He won't let me leave, I said. She stepped forward without hesitation. She said no. Back up. Tyler looked at her with a strange mix of irritation and disbelief, but also calculation. This is between us, he said. I'll call the police, she replied, lifting her phone. Tyler looked at me then, really looked, as if memorizing my fear. You'll regret making me look like the bad guy, he whispered. And then he walked away. Shaking, I got into the woman's car until I calmed enough to call Nora. When she arrived, she looked at me with something I couldn't name, not surprise, not confusion. Recognition. As I explained everything, Nora's voice dropped to a whisper. Doesn't this sound like what I told you before? I froze. What do you mean? Nora hesitated, then finally admitted, I once dated someone like that. Someone who disappeared, reappeared, followed me everywhere. I didn't tell you everything. Her words trembled. Fear. Memory. Something old and dark. I felt there was still more she wasn't saying. That night, even in my locked apartment, I felt eyes on me. A car like Tyler's passed by. A shadow lingered downstairs. Tyler had crossed a line. And I knew I had to cross mine. The next morning, sunlight hadn't even reached the window when I woke with a tight heaviness in my chest. My apartment no longer felt like a safe place. Every moment with Tyler, the way he stood too close, the way his eyes clung to me, the quiet threat in the parking lot, replayed in slow, sharp fragments. I knew that staying silent would only let things unravel further. I gathered everything, messages, call logs, dates, the times Tyler appeared coincidentally. When I laid them out together, the pattern was terrifyingly clear. This wasn't jealousy. This wasn't insecurity. This was a cycle, refined, repeated, intentional. I called Nora and asked her to come with me to the police station. She agreed immediately, almost too immediately. Her fear was real, pulsing underneath every word. At the station, I told the officer everything. He listened, nodding slowly as he typed. But when I described the parking lot encounter, how Tyler blocked my way and whispered a threat, the officer's expression changed. His tone grew serious. When he reached the messages where Tyler repeatedly asked for my location, he paused and asked, has anyone else reported similar behavior from this man? I didn't know. But. Beside me, Nora flinched. Outside, I turned to her. Nora, what do you know? She stood still for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. There was another girl. Someone I used to work with. She told me her ex-boyfriend disappeared, came back with perfect apologies, knew where she was all the time, followed her in silence. When she said his name, I felt sick. Tyler. Why didn't you tell me? My voice broke. Because I wasn't sure, she said, eyes filling. Because I was afraid of being wrong. And I was afraid of being right. I didn't want to believe you were walking into the same thing someone else barely escaped. That evening, Nora contacted the woman again. I sat beside her, listening as the woman described everything, the tracking, the disappearances, the returns, the control. Her story matched mine almost perfectly. Tyler wasn't improvising. He was repeating. The next day, the police issued a formal warning and started a temporary restraining order. I changed locks, blocked accounts, reset passwords. Nora brought dinner and stayed with me until the silence felt less suffocating. Late at night, I sat in my quiet living room and wrote everything down, not to blame myself, but to remember that my instincts had never been wrong. Tyler didn't return because he loved me. He returned because I fit into the pattern he had already used on someone else. What haunted me most wasn't Tyler. It was Nora's silence, the kind born from old fear, not betrayal. Sometimes people don't stay quiet because they don't care. Sometimes they stay quiet because they've already seen the ending once, and they're terrified it will happen again. And I made myself a promise: no one will ever get to rewrite my boundaries, or my story, ever again.